Festschrift.
Honoring Kip Williams. I brought along Selma, especially so she could say.
Festschrift.
We want it to be top-notch, so it's very, very important that we covered this. So we do appreciate you all being here today during today's
Festschrift.
Thank you. You'll be hearing from students that have worked with Kip. What they'll be talking about is their research and how it grew out of Kip's research, how it's become their research and where it's headed. So how their research has now included Kip's research on ostracism, oddly enough. So I'd like to give everyone a large round of applause, and Paolo Riva will begin with us today.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Hello. Thank you, Jim, for organizing this very nice symposium. I'm super happy to be here. Actually, I was so excited that I even tried to enter the country illegally yesterday. I completely forgot about filling out this HESTA document that apparently we are supposed to fill out when we are entering US from abroad. But I made it. Okay, so the talk is going to be about 3 areas: social influence, technology, and temporal aspect of ostracism, and 8 lessons that I learned from Kip. So in preparing this presentation, I went back looking for the first mail I sent to Kip. It was 2008, also known as the year of Obama election. Okay, yeah, is that what I want? Why? It's ugly? You think? No. That's actually that's the email. So I wrote to him. I had 0 publication, so I had, in my mind, 0 chance to get a reply back. So I was really ready to be ostracized. But lucky for me, he didn't, and so he replied. It was really nice, and he started to set things up very nicely and pragmatically from the beginning. So here the first lesson I learned from Kip, which is opportunity for everyone. So being inclusive in a time in which this word was not so common as perhaps today. I must say, though, that there was some ostracism, because I recently realized that of the time I was there, which I was supposed to stay there 6 months, and then I ended up staying there for more than a year, actually a year and a half. And so of all this time, he didn't have a single picture of me or house. So I will get back to this shortly. So, first area, which is social influence. Well, you know, Kip started before being famous for studying ostracism. He was famous for studying social influence, and actually he later framed the study of ostracism within the area of social influence. Here is an example of a study he published with some others unknown co-authors. He was also very modest. He put himself second on this paper. And so the paper is about elevators, cheeseburgers, very interesting stuff. Actually, there is a theory behind it, because the whole idea is to look at social inhibition and to see if social inhibition occurs not only when people are helping others, but also when people are helping themselves. So it's really contrasting this diffusion of responsibility construct with social inhibition. So still about cheeseburger, but also about theory. And that's the second lesson, yes, I learned from Kip, which is research can be fun. Actually, it's supposed to be fun. How I try to apply this principle? Well, of course, I haven't get to the standard, to keep standards about cheeseburgers, but in this study here, to me, it's still not the common thing because it's about two people, so very, I guess, far away on the power analysis current standards in our discipline in terms of sample size, but it's about two people being in North Greenland for 2 months, isolating and testing this environment, this habitat that is supposed to serve as a house when humans are gonna colonize the moon. So, weird enough, it was a lot of fun, and yes, it's based on two people, but we could see some patterns because we asked them to fill out a measure daily, and so some patterns in terms of what they were doing daily and their feelings of isolation and their feelings of resignation. In terms of social influence, here is another example of how I try to apply what I learned from Kip in my research later on in my career. So here, well, very shortly, the literature, some studies say that yes, non-human agent can influence humans, even if they are non-human agents, so they can have a social influence effect, you know, even in terms of classic paradigm like Sheriff Swan or Ashwan. Other studies found no effect, so we thought that maybe there is some moderation here, and a crucial variable could be the nature of the task. So we ran two studies. In one study, we call it objective study because it was about this dot counting series of images. So our participants had to estimate the number of dots. They had 7 seconds for each image. So it's very hard to do it accurately, so they can guess. And after they guess, we provided them with 2 estimates at the same time. One was from another human being, and the other estimate was from an artificial intelligence system. And so they asked them, we asked them again if they want to change their mind and to provide another estimate. And then of course we look at the influence of the 2 agents. In study 2, we use supposedly subjective images, so these are more evocative images. And in these cases, the human and the artificial intelligence system were providing 2 different labels. 2 different labels that were supposed to describe the image. And so we ask our participants, where do you place yourself between these 2 labels? Which one you find more convincing? Results is that people tend to follow the artificial agency for more compared to the human being for objective tasks, but they do the opposite for subjective ones. Okay, so working with Kip, I felt he always had something with technology. He was fascinating and he was having fun with this idea of technology. Of course, there is cyberball, which is, you know, there is something technological in it. But there is a lot more than that. And so I'm sharing 2 memories here. Yes, Kip. The first, which he probably will deny, is that, because he already did, but I don't care. When I was in his lab at Purdue, during the lab meetings, he used to play video games during lab meetings. And I felt that a bit weird, you know, because you expect the big professor to listen those who are presenting and this kind of thing, but he was actually focused. So he was then making perfectly appropriate comments and super remarkable stuff, but at the same time he was playing video games. So that one thing. And then there's the second memories, which is about a study idea that I had in mind when I was there, so 2009. Very briefly, it was about inducing ostracism feelings just by showing a neutral face. So there is research about, you know, direct gaze and averted gaze, but I wanted to do something just with a direct gaze, but with a neutral face. And I didn't want to do the classic study in the lab. So at that time it got popular, this platform called Chat Roulette. I don't know if you know it. It was popular then, and I thought it was super cool because the idea was that these platform connecting two video chat, two video call, two people randomly around the globe, connecting it with the video cameras on, and they could talk. And so I thought, having confederates, being trained to showing a neutral face or an emotional face, and to monitoring, I don't know, the amount of time the other person took to skip the thing. I thought it was great, but we had an issue, which has to do with human nature, in particular male human nature, because when I was in Kip's office showing him the platform, well, out of 10 video chat we tried, 9 were about males showing their bodily parts. And so, unfortunately, he was not brave enough to support me in doing the study, and we ended up not doing the study. That was really bad. Apparently now there is an AI system that blocks the weird nails we have on the planet, and so maybe we can do it now. Anyway, that's also about the third lesson, and so to consider not only the social nature of human being, but also the technological nature of human being, and to look at this intersection between our sociality and how the way we use technology, so the way we connect with technology and the way we connect through technology with other people. So despite that failure, later on I continued doing stuff related to technology. We did study on slot machine anthropomorphization, we did study on video game aggression, we did other studies on online dating platforms, on smartphone interference in online relationships. So all of this has to do with the way digital technologies can connect or disconnect each other, people on each other. Speaking of which, Kip was able to study stuff that didn't even exist when he studied them. Because I think that, so everybody knows what's ghosting now. We use it in common language, when we use digital communication, we use this word very commonly. In 2004, this word wasn't there, but Kip did this study, which is exactly about ghosting, because it's people not getting a reply on their messages. So it's very easy to do ghosting study right now, but I guess it was not so easy then, and maybe he wants to call the thing ghostasis, but we can argue about that. Anyway, that's another lesson, lesson number 4. And I don't think I was able actually to pick this one up in my career, but still one of his teaching. So to try to see things that not everybody sees. And he did that not only for ghosting, but also for sure with ghostasis. So in the 90s, when nobody in social psychology cared about these effects for the lack of social attention, he was able to see the phenomena and to bring it to the attention, actually, of pretty much everybody in social psychology. Next lesson. I think one of the ways we can describe Kip's career is to see it as an attempt to get rid of an effect. Usually people try to find effect, we want to find effect. He was trying for years and years to get rid of this ostracism effect. So the physical ball in the lab, then the ball went online and the effect was still there. Then he told people, okay, it's the computer doing this, and the effect, it was still there. Then there was the KKK study, there was the cyberbomb study, there was the inclusion cost study, and many others. So every time going minimal and trying to get rid of these effects. So this to me is another lesson that we can learn from him. In this table here, you can see that, yeah, we know what happened to victims of ostracism. We also know what happens if there is non-human agent ostracizing humans. Thanks to Wesselmann, we know that if we observe somebody else being ostracized, usually people feel the pain of that. We thought there was maybe a missing box, and we call this research, this is still unpublished, but we call it how low can we still go? And the idea is to have people observing the exclusion of a robot and to see if that is enough to hurt humans. Through study, we actually found that just by observing a robot, actually just an image of a robot, is enough for people to feel hurt. And we also compare the exclusion of a robot compared to the exclusion of a human, finding no difference. So this maybe speaks of this power of this human ostracism detection system. The last section is about temporal aspect of ostracism. So all models are wrong, but some are useful. This unfortunately is not a quote from Kip originally, but I remember him going around saying all theories are wrong. And so that's a theory. Temporal nitride model, a very useful theory. Will be useful for years and decades. We know a lot about stage 1 and stage 2. Maybe we know a little bit less about stage 3, that is called the resignation stage. So in the model, Kip wrote, people will get to this resignation stage characterized by alienation and depression if ostracism episodes persist over extended time. So at first we provided support for this idea, and indeed if people feel excluded for a prolonged time, they are more likely to have higher levels on those for constant. Then we started to think that maybe reality can be more complex than that. And so one study we did, it's inside prisons. I believe that prisons are a very good example, unfortunately, of social exclusion by the very definition. So we kept some people apart from others, okay? So we can say that people in prisons are objectively excluded. It's not just, feelings or whatever. Here we found that, yeah, on average, you can see that higher level of resignation, but you can also find some specific population of prisoners who are no different in terms of resignation outcomes compared to free citizens. And so this was the first data set showing that this resignation stage doesn't seem to be an avoidable outcome of prolonged social exclusion. We then looked to other population, other excluded population. The first one was homeless people. And here again we found that there were some moderators. So some homeless people were displaying these higher levels of resignation stage outcomes, but others didn't. And these had to do with social identity, so how much they identified with the homeless group, and also depending on the connection. So how many connections they had with other homeless people or other non-homeless people. Final sample is about immigrants and asylum seekers. Again, two populations that are very likely to experience social exclusion. In this first study here, we look at the time because who knows how extended is extended? I mean, it's a week long enough, it can be. It's a month long enough, or it needs to be a year. So how long it should be? And here it's preliminary stuff, but we found that the time window in which you see this development of resignation outcomes, it goes after 3 months. So it's in this time window from 3 to 6 months and not before. And in other studies, we find again this, result that if immigrants have connection with the host population, they have low level of the resignation stage outcomes, but if they have a high number of connection, relatively speaking, with other immigrants, they are more likely to experience resignation. Okay, that's it. And that's the 8th lesson. It's about the power of social connection. So not only the power of silence, but the power of social connection. Here is a brief recap of what I learned from Kip. You might have missed number 7, but only if you haven't been around Kip, because otherwise you know that. And so I told you that we had a picture, and last year we made it up, and so we finally got a picture. Thanks to Kip, thanks to Jim, Eric, Adrienne, all the people that were at Purdue when I was there, and thank you all for your attention and being here.
All right, so we won't have a time for questions this time around, but we will be up front, happy to answer questions and things like that. But as I make the transition, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Selma Rudert, who you will recognize from earlier.
Alrighty. I'm going to talk about something else than festschrift now. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for inviting me, Jim. I'm super excited to be here. Now, maybe first, let's start with a little introduction, or why I know Kip. After all, as you might have noticed, I'm from Germany, and so that's where I also met Kip for the first time. I think that was in 2012, where he gave their workshop on ostracism, and I basically just stumbled into that workshop a little bit on accident. I wasn't even a PhD student at the time, and I actually had no idea what this research topic was, but then during the workshop I actually liked it so much that I kind of discovered, hey, that's something cool, I could do my PhD thesis on that. And I did, and in fact, I liked it so much that it stuck with me. Kip was actually a reviewer on said thesis, and well, over the years he just became this really important mentor to me. We worked together ever since on so many projects, the book, various summer schools, that kind of thing. All right, so just get to the research part. Let's talk about that scene that I think got the entire ostracism research train rolling. That day where Kip Williams didn't get a frisbee thrown to him and decided, I'm going to start researching ostracism and I'm going to invent cytobol, or I imagine that's how it went. We know really a lot how Kip felt that day when he didn't get that frisbee. So we knew he kind of felt his needs were threatened, and then he realized he had to fortify it and I think go play with his dog, because otherwise he might get depressed in the long time. We know all that because Kip made this great temporal need threat model that Paolo just talked about, and that became very, very influential in our field, as I'm sure you all know. Now, as I said, we know a lot about Kip, how Kip felt during that day. But what I became interested in recent years is actually, what about those two guys? So what are they thinking, and why actually did they make the decision to ostracize poor Kip on that day? And as I kept thinking about it further, it occurred to me it's kind of a weird paradox in a way, because if you look at the literature that's out there, ostracism doesn't just have negative consequences for the target, it also has a ton of negative consequences for the sources. So, for instance, people who ostracize, they might face punishment or devaluation from others who do not agree with the decision to ostracize. We know that ostracizing actually decreases performance, so for instance on self-regulation tasks. And of course you might have to deal with feelings of guilt. So why the hell do people do that? Why do they not throw frisbees to Kip? Those two guys. So why do people ostracize in the first place? And I think there are a couple of answers to that question, and I'm not going to go into all of them today. Could be, of course, have to do something with their personality, and I'm currently doing some research on that, actually with Hales, with Janice Kelly, and of course with Kip. Could be accidental emotional, and I think that's something that happens more often than people actually think. Could be selfish as some kind of power tool or something. But what I'm going to focus on here in my talk today is specific ostracism decisions that people do for the benefit of the group or because they think it helps their goal attainment. And I believe that it kind of helps people circumvent, or in these kind of decisions, that those circumvent many of those negative consequences outlined here. So let's get into that. Ostracism as a means for group regulation. And I think the main message here is, or the main issue, that societies and groups traditionally do not allow for unlimited cooperation and inclusion simply because it's not possible to include everybody, or in most situations it's not possible. That's usually both a question of efficacy and also of efficiency and also of limited resources that a group or society might have. And I believe that kind of makes ostracism and exclusion, unfortunately, a necessary tool that groups and societies need in a way to regulate group membership. So basically, in short, they have to select optimal cooperation partners and they kind of have to remove in a way suboptimal ones. And so what I'm doing in my research together with my research group, we're kind of focusing on two reasons that I believe are central for this here. First, individuals who in a way kind of violate social norms, who act uncooperative, who threaten the cohesion of the group. And second, individuals who, for whatever reason, have trouble contributing to group goals and thus are often perceived as expendable by groups. And those, damn it, I left an acronym here, sorry. I think I didn't need those. So that got part of the model that I came up with, the situated ostracism model. Sorry, Kip, just ignore the acronym. Don't focus on the model in its entirety. Basically, I just want to talk about these two main facets that I mentioned before, perceived norm violation and perceived expendability. Now, we did a couple of studies on that to investigate those. First of all, we just basically asked people, hey, think of a situation where you actually all decided to ostracize or exclude another person. And in fact, yes, of our sample, about 60%, when we asked them later, they attributed that decision to perceived norm violation, and about 30% attributed that decision to perceived expendability. Now, in another study, we asked the other party involved in this, so we asked the target, so that was like more of a regular survey where we assessed self-reported norm violation, self-reported expendability, and ostracism frequency, found that both is kind of correlated, but as you see, self-reported norm violation wasn't even significant in that study, and self-reported expendability was a much more important driver here. And I think the reason for why these results differ so much is, of course, like the different perspectives that if you ask the sources, you'll get a very different answer than if you ask the targets. So we needed something more objective to rely on, which is why obviously we moved over to experiments. And what we did in these kinds of experiments, the participant in these experiments always assumed the role of a group leader, and they were told, well, you're supposed to form a group with some other members to work together on some kind of task, cooperative math task, whatever. And the thing is, you can decide to exclude one person. Importantly, the participant didn't have to exclude a person. They could just include everyone if they wanted to. Then they got some potential people to cooperate with. Of those two who were like pretty unremarkable and normal. And then the third person, that was the target, and that was where the manipulation came in. So the person either introduced themselves as being in a very kind of rude way, or in a way that kind of indicated they might have issues with the upcoming tasks. So they said they're really bad at math and it's a math task, or they were just, a control person basically. All right, so essentially here's what we found. Yes, people chose to ostracize both the targets that was kind of perceived as expendable, and the target that was kind of perceived as non-violating. As you might have noticed from this slide, non-violation was a bit more important in that experiment. However, don't focus too much on that, because in another study, we actually found out it depends a lot on the situational context. So in this study, we introduced the moderator, so we told our participants that the upcoming task was either about performance or such as the math task, or it was really about cooperation and required trust. Essentially, it was a trust game. And as you can see there, we find a perfectly nice interaction. So for the individuals where we indicated they might have low competence at the math task, they were actually ostracized more often from the performance task, requiring cognitive skills, and less often from the cooperation task. And for the non-violation individuals, it was just the other way around. So they were excluded more often when we said, well, the upcoming task really requires trust, than when it was merely about performance. Now, I think that is actually a really important finding, because it kind of shows us that ostracism, or at least in those experiments, people did not decide to ostracize randomly, but they did it quite strategically. So they wanted good cooperation partners in their group for the upcoming task. And I think that's an important finding, because that also kind of hints that if we want to reduce ostracism, changing the situational context might actually become key. All right, so I told you all this is kind of a bit of a bigger model. There, I moved, yeah, too late. So what are we doing right now? We're kind of doing research on moderators that moderate the relation between target behavior and ostracism. Also, we're looking at potential alternatives to ostracism. In fact, Christoph, who's over there, will do a talk about that on Saturday, 10:30, I believe, something like that. Yeah, so you should go come see his talk if you want to know more about that. And then we kind of also doing the loop back, basically, and see, well, based on different reasons for ostracism, how does that influence target attribution? All right, I'm going to show you one more study that we did on moderators, or that I did on moderators lately, because I think that worked out quite nicely. So one moderator we're looking at is the expectancy of behavioral change. We believe that if people think that targets might actually change their behavior in the future, that this should lower ostracism intentions, particularly permanent ostracism decisions. So what we did here, we simply manipulate whether the target was doing multiple non-violations, so it was rude, for instance, for several times, or whether it just happened one single time. But also in an accident or something. Again, we looked at frequency of exclusion here, and as you can see, yes, multiple non-violations resulted in higher frequency of ostracism, also in a higher motivation to protect the group from the target, and also less intentions to recruit that target later on. Right, I'm getting to the end of my talk. That I'd really like to thank all my collaborators on this, particularly my PhD student from my lab, also the student assistants who worked on that, you for all your attention, the German Research Foundations for graciously funding me, and just to do the full loop back. So I told you at the beginning, there are multiple reasons why people may ostracize, unfortunately, I don't think those guys came up with a model detailing exactly what happened that day, so we may never learn exactly what those guys thought that day about Kip. What I do know, and that I'm very certain of, is that Kip has not been expendable for many, many, many people in this room today. Certainly he hasn't been expendable for me, so the biggest thank you goes, of course, to you.
So we'll have our next speaker coming up, Zhansheng Chen.
I'm very happy to be here. I'm very glad to be here as well. And Thank you, Kip, for everything, for my academic career, and also for Taggart for organizing this symposium. So for me, it's so I really like the two previous presentations. I think if I heard them earlier, I would have prepared a different slides. But since I didn't get a chance to hear that, so I'm going to just go through my slides with a lot of discussions. So there will be just a reference. So first of all, I want to share my experience with the Kip. So it's quite different. So I graduated from Purdue. Kip was my PhD supervisor. But my experience at Purdue was very different from a lot of students because I was totally lost in the first few years. Actually, I was admitted as a student in the developmental psychology. I was studying infants. So for 1 year. They cry all the time, so I couldn't do it. So eventually I got admitted into the social psych program. I was very fortunate to have a group of professors who are very welcoming. So they said, "Oh, come, we are very happy to have you." So, but when I first came to the social psych program, I had no idea what this field is about. So I know nothing about the methodologies, the major questions. So to me, it's really a new experience that you got into an area I really haven't thought much about. But the professors there, including Chris, James Kelly, also we had Riva, so they were all very supportive. They said, why don't you try out different labs and see which one you like the most. Now this is something I cannot imagine happening at another place. At least it's rare to happen anywhere in the world. So this is a very open program. They encourage me to try out basically anything I like. So I guess I'm a difficult student. So I tried one lab after another. I just couldn't find the click. So I went around for a couple of years. I still couldn't find the area I feel like I really want to focus on. I feel like this is something this is for me. So I was really stressed out. I was depressed. Well, I wouldn't say depressed, but I was super stressed out. So when Kip came to Purdue, so I was already in my third year. But it's great to have a new professor. So I talked to him, and he said, why don't you, get a feeling of what I'm doing, read some of the papers, and see whether you like them. So it took a while. So I gradually, come to the lab meetings. Eventually, after a year, I decided to join the lab, to work on. Finally, I feel like included after all the years. So that's one major lesson. So I think, sometimes you just have to be fortunate to find someone or something that might work for you, right? So I was very glad to meet Kip at this stage of my life when I was really in a lot of doubt about my own career path, about my future. So he was a savior to me back then. So that's lesson one. So lesson two is highly related to lesson one because I was, when I finally joined the Kip's lab, I was already in my fourth year in graduate school. I had no project, nothing written out. So I was doomed to fail at that time. So I was stressed out. So whenever I talked to Kip, I was always really super anxious about what I want to do, what I want to achieve. I was always a highly motivated student. I have always had high goal, there's something I want to do. But that doesn't, what I've been doing doesn't really lead to that. I was very, very anxious and also kind of disappointed at myself. So this is lesson two. Kip was like, okay, what if you fail? That's not the end of the world. So you cannot push yourself like this. So basically the idea is that you have to be at ease. So I think that's another major lesson for me over the years. No matter how awful, how desperate the situation is, you have to prepare yourself to be in a state of being at ease. So you have to find ways to calm yourself, to deal what's going on, what's in front of you, not to take things too personally. Do not blame yourself all the time. You are not the one to blame. Maybe sometimes, but not always. So we have to be comfortable with ourselves, right? So no matter where we are, what kind of status we are in, we have to, be comfortable to include ourselves. So basically, it's to deal, to face ourselves, to be kind to ourselves. So this also leads to one of my primary research program, which is on positive psychology. I study compassion and self-compassion, and also particularly focus on the idea of at ease. So that's a kind of new thing I'm looking at the moment. Trying to, my proposal is this is a character that can be cultivated. So we need to be able to at ease, to have a careful life. So basically everything has to flow from the state of being at ease. So that's another major lesson I think in grade school. So which lead me to a new program after 15 years away from Purdue. Another thing, there's a third lesson. So I have third lesson learned from Kip over the years is to work with people. So I was always very independent. So when I was in school, even in grade school, even today I still consider myself a very independent person. But academic career, even any career, we cannot just be on our own, so we have to work with others. So Kip is very super good at, basically he did show it, demonstrated to me why this is critical for your success. So I think, briefly summarize, not as detailed as Paolo did, but I think these are things I just have a quick thought while sitting there and listening to what Paolo has to say. I think these are some little things that come to my mind. All right, so for my talk, so I'm just going to go quickly on some of the findings, some of the projects I did over the years as highly linked to, they're guided by Kip's theory. They help us to understand human mind, including mostly human behaviors, but also human affect, human thoughts. So I think, as Selma mentioned, Kip has a very detailed theory, this temporal framework, give us a very good idea to understand the human mind through a process. Whenever we're trying to understand certain outcomes, certain human mind, we have to ask the question, why? Could be a time sequence, but also could be, could it be just one single process or multiple processes? Kip proposed, there are several things you have to look into when you think about humans' responses to anything. So this basically became part of my own way of thinking about research questions over the years. These slides can go through very quickly. So the first topic and the first project I want to mention briefly is on dishonesty. So this is a project I did with my PhD student. So we looked at why ostracism or being excluded could lead to high level of dishonesty. So our idea was quite simple. So we had, first we had the participants to write down their past experience. These are included or ostracized. So with an imitation check, then we ask them to imagine a situation. Basically, there were 5 scenarios where they might be engaging in behavior like that, and also whether they will do it. So basically, for example, to fabricate a CV to get a job, right? So it's something people might be tempted to do in their daily life. So afterwards, this was, we found that when people recalled an ostracism experience, they were more apt to behave dishonestly. We replicated that with a different implementation. We had a emergent scenario. We also included mutual control. Then also we used the participants from Hong Kong other than the untagged participants. So in this study we included more scenarios. For example, like making probably nowadays like an issue, but back then phone call is also quite expensive for long distance ones. And also you could overcharge your customers to own bonus. So anyways, there's a list of things people might be doing, and we also look at whether altruism could increase people's tendency to engage in dishonest behavior. We did find that, and also we control for mutual. This is after you have mutual control condition. So then we move down to talk about the why question. Why do people do that? So what we proposed that was that people might feel entitled because when you are included, you have a lot of benefits, right? So you get a lot of support, you may get a lot of resources, but when you are excluded, you might feel you are deprived of a lot of opportunities. Could be tangible or intangible opportunities. People may feel entitled to make conversations through dishonesty. So that's what we proposed, and also that's what we assessed in this particular study. So we had people recall altruism experience or just a physical painful experience. Then we had them complete the measure of entitlement. So these are quite simple, very straightforward items to capture how entitled they felt. Then we had them work out negotiation test. For this one, the very idea is that, let's say you are hiring someone, you are interviewing someone, and you are basically this person is hired. The real scenario is that there's no other person. This is the only suitable candidate. You have to hire this person. But you could, your job as an employee is to try to negotiate low salary. So if you can do that, you might even get a bonus. There's some kind of, reward. So the idea is that whether you will review the scenario to the applicant, who might be in a much better position to negotiate for the salary, right? So the question is whether people will review the true information. So what we found was when people were being ostracized, they are less likely to review the true information to their job applicant, and their feeling of entitlement accounted for this effect. Then we move down to further test this process with different paradigms. We had a sample of percentages we know about this paradigm already. Then we had them to work on an anagram task. Now for this task, we hit a 15. 8 were solvable and 7 were unsolvable. So for every one, they work on this on the computer. We give them an envelope with cash. So whenever they get anything correct, they can take out $2. So the response will be recorded. Afterwards, we compare the money they took away and also the correct responses they got. Because all these items are very straightforward. If you got it right, you know you got it right. So there's not a lot of room for ambiguity. So basically, we calculate the money they took away, which they shouldn't. So as a way to capture their dishonesty. And we find it we replicate the same result. So people who were ostracized took more undeserved money, and the feeling of entitlement accounted for that. So then we further tested this process through a manipulation. So what we did was, because in our argument, why people behave dishonestly for altruism was because they felt like they were being deprived, right? Altruism deprived their opportunities. So we could change that kind of mindset. So we created 2 sets of materials. So explain the meaning of being ostracized. So because you could easily, so this was as set of materials that we have used in another study. So basically the idea is to give the meaning. When people think about altruism, usually people feel it's awful to be rejected or ostracized. But altruism can also create opportunities. We know a lot of people go through difficult times. They eventually, later on, become much stronger, right? So they can grow out of it and become better, benefit from this experience. So that's why we created 2 sets of materials. One makes them, change the feeling of altruism, so they feel they will be deprived, or they will not be deprived by the experience. So afterwards, there's an inflection. So only when people perceive altruism as a depriving experience, became more dishonesty, have high level of dishonesty, and this effect was needed by the feeling of entitlement. I was just informed I ran out of time. So overall, so this is just one example. So, but I, over the years, I have looked at the various human responses. This could be directly out of altruism, but it could also be things come up from variables I'm interested in. For example, I study social crowding in Hong Kong. The cities were crowded, so I study the consequences of being crowded. So I kind of use the same Kip's model to guide me to understand, how to understand the human process. What is the mental process in my opinion? So how should we test that? So that has been a very interesting journey for me. So overall, let me just go very quickly. I also need the opportunity to thank my students. So I worked with various students over the years. So I was very fortunate last summer to get a chance to, to gather with all my former students. Kind of not quite like this, but it's a very special experience for me. So some of them are working altruism, not everyone. So I don't think people will feel ostracized by this information. Thank you.
Alrighty, well, thank you all for coming out to celebrate Kip Williams' research career. So before I launch into my research of my esteemed colleagues, I'm going to tell a couple stories about Kip that in many ways has sort of framed the way that I approach not just the study of ostracism, but thinking about social psychology broadly. So when I first got to Purdue back in 2006, Kip handed me some different articles to sort of get acclimated to the lab, and one was a chapter he wrote in 1997 in an edited book. And this was sort of early on in his ostracism thinking, so you could tell as you were reading it, he was really trying to not just grapple with how to study it empirically, but how to understand it conceptually. And when he gave it to me, he said this was one of his, what he thought was one of his most scholarly creative papers. And when you looked at it, he didn't just draw on social psychology, but other areas of psychology, anthropology, ethology, right? And so I very much appreciated reading it, this sort of interdisciplinary nature of how he was trying to understand ostracism, because it was something that I've always loved and continue to look to, So Kip was very much like, well, if your current paradigms don't have it, maybe you can find inspiration elsewhere. So fast forward a little bit to a lab meeting where we were sort of kicking around ideas about me in my early stages of my dissertation. And I was kind of frustrated because Cyberball as it currently existed really couldn't help me get at the questions I wanted to. And so I was, railing at the heavens, and Kip kind of stopped and looked at me and said, well, if you were just a little more creative, maybe you could solve this problem. So after I got done nursing my wounded pride, I thought, he's right. And so when you look at the totality of his career, certainly ostracism, even just the 2001 book, obviously there are a lot of laboratory experiments, but you also have role-play studies, live Confederate studies, event contingent diaries, detailed interviews, right? And so you see a convergence across all these methods, basically centering now on how we define and ultimately measure ostracism. So, but of course I didn't appreciate it at the time, right? I do now. And because at the time I was focused more on looking at one-time ostracism manipulations, usually Cyberball, looking at the immediate effects of pain, and then how do we think about and respond to try to recover. But towards the end of my time there, Kip created the third stage of his model. So moving beyond these one-time manipulations, how do we assess and understand the experiences of folks who experience this chronically? Things that both practically and ethically, we can't study directly with experiments, right? And so how do we get around that? Around that time, my colleague Adrienne Carter-Sowell was finishing her dissertation and created a measure to look at participants' sort of daily perceptions of how often they were being ostracized. And I pulled just a couple items here to give you a sense of it. So example, and my apologies, Adrienne, if I'm stealing your thunder. So, another little Kip connection.
Nice.
Thank you, thank you. In general, others leave me out of their group. Others treat me as someone invisible, they ignore me during their conversations. And I'm pulling this out because the remainder of the work I'm going to show you today, this measure that Adrienne created with Kip, is really foundational to the way that I'm currently examining ostracism. So another piece that's a little bit new, at least to me, is this concept of trauma. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the traumatology literature, I'll give you the short version. Two sort of key components to understanding this experience of trauma is it results from intense physical or emotional harm. And it has lasting adverse effects on health and well-being. These typically present themselves as what we might call post-traumatic stress symptoms. So involuntary flashbacks, avoidance of triggering cues, chronic physiological arousal. And one thing that traumatologists note is that although over time trauma symptoms do decrease, there really is no expiration date on trauma. That there may always be some residual and you can be re-traumatized. So whether my trauma happened yesterday or 40 years ago, it's still potentially there. And when we look across the voluminous literature of trauma, we see that whether we're talking about combat veterans or people who survived violent attacks or accidents or natural disasters, one of the core themes is that for resilience and recovery is person-centered quality social support, right? So feeling valued, feeling cared for and connected, feeling that there are folks who can help you navigate those stressors is key. And this is something that even beyond trauma research, Baumeister and Leary talked about. This is one of those benefits of having a satisfied sense of belonging. And ostracism would deprive you of those resources. And moving more specifically to some things that interested me, when we look, I'm not a veteran myself, I'm a civilian, but I have many friends from high school and college who have served in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and I was struck by how when they finally started to talk a little bit more about their experiences coming back to civilian life, they would talk about how they felt ignored by other civilians or by society generally. And when you look at some of the other research, like for example, Yochi Dresden, a journalist, did a wonderful book looking at soldiers cycling back into civilian life, and this became a theme called The Invisible Front was the name of the book. The Wounded Warrior Project is a nonprofit organization focused on helping particularly wounded veterans reintegrate into society, and that term, the greatest casualty is being forgotten. So these types of words I usually hear in the traditional ostracism literature, and my ostracism research radar sense went off. Right, Spider-Man has a Spidey sense, I have the ostracism sense maybe. But I thought, okay, maybe we can use Kip's paradigms and theoretical thinking to address this more directly. So I had some colleagues who had some funding from the Illinois National Guard, and we surveyed about 128 of them. We gave them a measure of post-traumatic stress symptoms. We also gave them other established measures that predict post-traumatic stress symptoms like deployment stress, perceived military social support, civilian support, and then we added into that measure of perceived ostracism that Adrienne created. And we found that not only did perceived ostracism predict unique variance above and beyond those other predictors, but it was the largest predictor. And if you notice too that the social support, those correlations become considerably smaller, and they kind of hover right there around the marginal significance area. Now, it could be tempting to think that, okay, well, these are not just opponent forces, but maybe it's two-sided, complete absence or presence. But when you look at the social support literature broadly, it's a lot more complicated than that. There are plenty of times where people try to be supportive, but they just do it badly. They say stupid, insensitive things that make people feel invalidated, right? And this is what I call cold comfort, botched social support. And some of my colleagues and I were thinking, well, maybe this isn't sort of as direct as being completely ignored, given the cold shoulder, but maybe there's this feeling of almost subtle ostracism, right? Saying, look, they're not hearing me. right? So we decided to use some of the remaining grant funds to fund another study among veterans. This time we used the reliving paradigm, which traditionally it asked people to think about a time where you were excluded or a time where you were included. People type out an essay and they fill out the traditional ostracism DVDs. How you were excluded, do you feel, basic needs, threat, etc. So what we did was we randomly assigned veterans to have a prompt where they remembered a time where they received helpful social support from civilians, unhelpful social support, or a control condition, which was like last time you ate breakfast, right? So people typed it out, filled out the DVs, and as we expected, wasn't a lot of feelings of perceived ostracism when people were eating breakfast. Okay, good. The unhelpful condition, as we hypothesized, there was a significantly higher feelings of being ignored and excluded when receiving unhelpful social support. Now, the helpful condition, you may recognize I've let that last. We expected this to be down to your control, but it wasn't. It was somewhere in the middle, right? So we dug into the qualitative responses, and in the unhelpful condition, for example, everybody could come up with examples of where they got unhelpful support from civilians. The helpful, though, we sort of saw these three different themes. There was a third of the people who came up with a clearly positive, helpful social support example. There was another third that had, largely positive, but still had some negativity to it, kind of a mixed bag interaction. And then there was a third who said, I never get helpful social support. I don't even try, right? So we started delving into that a little bit more, and here are just a couple anecdotal quotes to illustrate this. Here's one person who said, whenever I feel like sharing my feelings during my stay in the military, I did not find that much of a response. Most of the time, it's just a waste of time sharing. One person just very pithily said, they cannot understand, they cannot know. And then this one said, I like to share my grief and pain among my loved ones, but all the time I get ignored. I feel very lonely and guilty when I think I injured many during combat. I am ignored and no one supports me. Now I pulled this one out and highlighted those words in red because these are things that we use in our dependent measures. But these participants didn't get those measures yet. They were using these terms organically, right? And so this is still a relatively new area of research, so I still got to delve a lot more into it, but I just thought that this was particularly interesting. I've looked at ostracism and trauma in other contexts. So for example, when you look at the literature on miscarriage, right, a lot of the folks who experience miscarriage in the qualitative data will talk about how they feel that their loss is somehow minimized, invalidated, or ignored, either by friends and family or society broadly. And so again, at this point in time, my ostracism research radar went off, and I thought, okay, well, we have some measures now, we have some theory, let's try to measure this again directly. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to sort of give you the 2-cent summary of the research, and if you want to see more detailed results, we can talk about those later. We studied this among both mothers and fathers, and in this particular situation, we identified what are some usual grief measures that predict trauma. Are established, and then we added in the ostracism measures again. This time what we did was, instead of just using the in general others ignore me type of ostracism item stem, we made it specific to the trauma, specific to miscarriage. So because of my miscarriage, others leave me out of the loop, etc. And we found across both mothers and fathers the same type of patterns we saw among veterans, that not only did perceived ostracism predict trauma symptoms above and beyond the other established predictors, but again, it was the strongest predictor. So one of the things so now across these studies, I sort of found this theme that perceived ostracism can contribute to post-traumatic stress symptoms above and beyond the established stress. I started to think, well, could chronic ostracism be considered a trauma in and of itself? So it's very early, and this is kind of where I'm thinking now and just exploring, but what I put up there again is the two sort of core components to trauma. And then what do we know going back to Kip's 2009 model and some of the folks who have done some research in this area? So Paolo Riva's done some work in this, Selma Rudert's done some work in this, right? We know that folks who are chronically ostracized experience not just the typical need threat that we've been discussing, but more extreme negative outcomes, feelings of alienation, of depression, of learned helplessness and worthlessness, right? So, and some of these things are themes that will show up in trauma literature. We know from other research, for example, Christy Dean, who will be giving an invited talk on Saturday, I believe, has found that experimentally induced ostracism threatens our sense of physical safety. Other folks like Andy Hales and others have said, well, this also violates a sense of certainty. Again, for folks who study trauma and work with them clinically, we'll talk about how feelings of safety and certainty are important to reestablish. And finally, as some of Zhansheng's work talked about, social pain can be relived, dare I say, re-triggered, right? So all of this provides some nice theoretical foundation that maybe ostracism, chronic ostracism can be traumatic. But of course, we like data. I like data. This last semester, I decided to run a pilot study. Got 341 undergraduates, and all I did was give them this chronic measure of perceived ostracism and the PTSD symptoms measure. And I took those measures, and any time where it referred to trauma, I replaced the word trauma with ignored, excluded. And just basic correlation, simple, pretty strong, robust, positive correlation there, right? And so this excites me, scientifically, of course, not humanistically. But this is where I'm going to start going from here. So quick thank you to my participants, my funding sources, all of my collaborators and research assistants. Thanks to Jim for putting this together, the co-panelists, you wonderful folks in the audience, and last but certainly not least, Kip. Thank you for challenging me those years ago, and indeed the rest of us to be more creative.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Jim. Okay, I am excited to tell you about some research today. But first, I want to share there's something that I reluctantly love about Kip, and that's that he's always challenged me to broaden myself. You may not know this, but sometimes I can be fiercely closed to new experiences. I don't like to try new food, new movies, especially travel. I don't always enjoy those things, but Kip has always pushed me right to my comfort zone and then sometimes a little beyond. And because of that, I've had experiences and I've traveled places that I wouldn't have otherwise. And I am genuinely grateful for that. And it's not just food and travel. I also am grateful because Kip has encouraged me to think broadly about research, different theories in psychology, different topics in different areas. And today, I'm going to share some of that with you. This was an adventure I went on a topic not related to ostracism. Today, I want to talk about the psychology of public tragedies and how people relate to them. So, let's start with something we all know. People like to be connected to good things. So, I want my team to go all the way to the championship. And when they do, I want people to know that it's my team. We call this basking in reflected glory. It's nice to see a celebrity at the airport, that's cool. But also, I really want to tell people that I saw a celebrity at an airport. So basking in reflected glory is when you sort of announce or publicize your connections to someone who's a successful or a good event. So the idea today is straightforward enough. I want to suggest that people also, under some circumstances, might be motivated to bask in reflected tragedy. So this would be making other people aware of a connection that someone has, even just an incidental connection, to some sort of awful event. Now, some important notes before we get too far here. First, tragedies can have a real impact, even from a distance, and nothing I'm going to cover should minimize that. We just heard from Eric about the real impacts of trauma, and when people express that grief and they express their experiences with trauma, that's serious and important. But it's not quite what I'm going to be addressing today. Instead, I'll focus on situations where the connection to a tragedy is merely incidental. So a prototypical example here is, imagine you discover that some famous historic natural disaster had happened on your birthday. That's interesting. Would you be something you'd share with people? That's the question we'll address here. So I'll start with something you're not supposed to do, with some anecdotal evidence. Don't worry, there will be data. But if your news feeds are anything like mine, you've seen this before, right? People do this a lot. So just to illustrate with some examples here, several years ago when a musician died, one Facebook user shared a rest in peace and also mentioned, I feel fortunate to have seen him less than 3 months ago. Now sometimes it's more subtle. Following the infamous Las Vegas shooting, one Facebook user expressed condolences, but also included in the message this note that this was a tragedy that took place in my home state. Sometimes it's a bit of a stretch. I'm implicated in this one. When a public figure died a few years ago, I learned about it when my aunt posted a link to the news story on Facebook with the short description, "My father's fourth cousin." Now, I know this is a thing, not just because people do it on the internet, but also because people sometimes poke fun at the idea of doing it on the internet. So a couple years back on TikTok, there was a public tragedy, and people started to sort of tongue-in-cheek add comments like, "This happened 56 hours from me. I was just there 28 years ago, and I was in Michigan in the 90s. Man, near miss." So there's a sense that it's a thing, and it's not just anecdotes here. Like, a lot of interesting quirks of behavior, novelists have commented on this. So we know from Mark Twain the famous story of Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer being mistaken for dead and attending their own funeral. Embedded in that story is a wonderful scene where Mark Twain describes their classmates who believe their friends had just died, having a fierce debate over which one of them had spoken to the dead boys last. And Mark Twain said that they were competing for that dismal distinction. East of Eden has a character who pretty shamelessly positions himself as close to people related to tragedy. And my favorite example here, both because of how great the quote is, and also because I found out about it from Kip. He graciously noticed this and shared it with me when he found it. John Grisham named the phenomenon directly. He said that after a tragedy, those with even the slightest connections often exaggerate their involvement and importance. Okay, so we have anecdotes, we have literature. How about data? As a starting point, we figured we could just ask. So as a descriptive study, using a large US representative sample, we gave people a short description of the sort of sharing that we have in mind here. And we asked them to suppose that they had a connection to a tragedy and rate their agreement with this item. I would tell at least some people about my connection to the tragic event. So this is the distribution here. About 19% of people disagree, either moderately or strongly. They wouldn't share. But more than 3 times as many people indicate at least moderate agreement that they would share. Now, to get at this another way, we also asked people, can you think of any sort of indirect connections that you have to a tragic event? And about 38% of people said that they could. And so we asked them, when this event or topic comes up, how often do you tell or remind people about your connection? And here, hardly anyone said never. Only 8% of the sample said that they never do it, and 63% of the sample said they do it at least occasionally, and over a quarter of the sample said that they do it often or even every time that it comes up. So I think this is very plausibly a real phenomenon. We can stop and ask why. What could psychologically motivate this? And I'm aware of at least 2 plausible reasons. Now, the first is that tragedies matter. As awful as they are important. They're significant, people talk about them. We know from the need threat model that people have a deep need to be noticed and acknowledged and to feel like their existence matters. And if you can claim a connection to an undeniably important event, that could potentially satisfy that need to some extent. But not only do tragedies matter, they really matter to groups. So when a group or a community experiences a tragedy, very often they rally together. Their sense of identity increases, and there's a real sense of identity around that tragedy. And that presents sort of an opportunity, if one is connected to a tragedy, it could allow one to claim both centrality within the group, if the group's defined by the tragedy, and also distinctiveness at the same time. So here I'm saying tragedies could be a way for people to be optimally distinct. Now, at this point, it's fair to ask, maybe people just like to think about themselves or talk about themselves. Is there really anything about tragedies that are special here? So to look at this directly, we did an experiment where we asked people to read a variety of different scenarios. And for each one, there's a tragic version and a non-tragic version. We used 20 different scenarios to make sure that there's nothing distinct or unique about one of them that's causing the effect. And we just asked how willing they'd be to share a supposed connection. So for example, suppose a high school marching band is on a flight to Washington, D.C. to perform at a national ceremony for the first time in the school's history. The airplane crashed, leaving no survivors. Suppose you have a cousin who goes to this school but was not on the plane. To what extent would you tell people about this connection? And we compared that to a comparable but non-tragic comparison. So these are the results. On the top panel here, you can see the extent to which people would share a connection to a tragedy, and it is noticeably and significantly greater than the extent they'd share a connection to a non-tragedy. Okay, so at this point, it's tempting to think that people might be a little shameless. Maybe people are indiscriminate and willing to make any sort of tragedy about them by trumpeting their connections to it. That would be too hasty. So people observe social norms. We really care about politeness, and we really care about not doing something inappropriate. And people very plausibly have a sense that it would be inappropriate to position yourself as really close to a tragedy and make it about you. So to examine this possibility, we also included a second question. So we asked not only would you share your connection, but should you share your connection? And here we see a really interesting pattern in the results. So if you look at the bottom panel first, the non-tragedies, you see a modest but noticeable appreciation here from people that, yeah, they say they would share more than they should, but not by all that much. But if you compare that to the top panel with the tragedies here, the difference is twice as big, the discrepancy between what they would do and what they themselves say that they should do. So this is a sign that there's a brake pedal. People seem to have some awareness that it's not entirely appropriate, and that might temper the tendency to announce connections to tragedies. So this is good so far, but you might be wondering if people would do this spontaneously. After all, we've told them to imagine they have a connection. If we actually planned a connection, would they spontaneously announce that to people? So in 2 follow-up studies, each healthily powered, we looked at this, again manipulating whether these events are tragic or a non-tragic counterpart. And the 2 studies used a slightly different dependent measure. The more interesting one asked people to just open-ended describe the event. The distinction doesn't matter much because neither study showed an effect, contrary to our hypothesis. People were not significantly more likely to spontaneously share their connection to the tragedy. So where does that leave us? Anecdotes abound. And people say that they would do it in a large representative sample. And they say they would do it across a bunch of different tragedies. But when we give them the chance, they not seem to have taken us up on that. So I think the correct conclusion here, for now at least, is that there are opposing forces.
So we can think of impelling forces that might impel someone to share their connection. It's distinctive, it's interesting, it's important to the group. But those are countered by repelling forces. I want to observe norms, I don't want to be inappropriate. It seems in these last two studies here, perhaps the impelling forces were weak. Maybe a birthday is just too thin of a connection. This was an online survey. Maybe people need to be face-to-face with someone so they can see their impressed reaction when they share a connection to a tragedy. Or maybe they were just too concerned about appropriateness to share the connection. So we'll continue to work on this. More data we'll show eventually. So last, I want to thank my collaborators, Mason Burns and Ken Tan, and of course, all the thanks in the world to Kip. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Maayan.
This is my graduation day. Besides earning my PhD, it marked the moment Kip officially started music-ing. It's also when I confessed to Kip that when we first met and he offered me to work with him about 8 years prior, I secretly thought, oh God, I do not want to do research with that ballroom. And yet, here we are today. I learned many things from Kip. One of them is to adopt a holistic view of an issue, consider different perspectives of a social situation. Therefore, I'd like to present to you one of my recent projects today, in which I focus on the perspective of the observer of ostracism. Dehumanization is defined as the denial of humanness to others. It has been mainly researched in the field of integral relations and was used to explain the different perceptions people have toward their in-group members versus their out-group members. As the theory evolved, dehumanization has been regarded as something more nuanced. Dehumanization occurs not only when we perceive someone as not human, but also when she is perceived as not fully evolved, not fully human, or as less human. By perceiving someone as less human, we are excluding her from the same moral regard that is saved for humans like us, which results in making people indifferent to the suffering of others. Subtle forms of dehumanization include denying people attributes that are exclusive to humans, denying people uniquely human traits, those that distinguish us from other animals, results in animalistic dehumanization, as we perceive them as no different from other animals. Denying people that are a part of human nature, those that we share with other animals but are fundamental to human beings, result in mechanic dehumanization, as they are left with complex cognitions but not with basic interpersonal skills. Now, it will be news to no one in this room that ostracism is defined as to be ignored and excluded. However, it may be interesting for you to learn that from a dehumanization perspective, ostracism may be interpreted as being excluded from humanity. Chen and Hales argue that ostracism includes denying a person's social connection, which is essential for human beings. Social connection is the minimal consideration that humans deserve, and by denying it, the target of ostracism is dehumanized. When people observe the ostracism of another person, like targets of ostracism, they first detect the ostracism and experience threat to their fundamental needs. Then they reflect and try to make sense of the event, which includes making attributions to those wrong involved. Carter found that observers dehumanize targets of ostracism by attributing to targets less human nature traits and also less human uniqueness traits. So the goals of this research were to gain a better understanding of observers' tendency to dehumanize targets of ostracism utilizing a multi-method approach, and to examine whether the target holding a stigmatized characteristic alters the way observers react to ostracism and their tendency to dehumanize the target. Individuals who are considered burdensome and deviant are often ostracized, dehumanized, and stigmatized. The more one is perceived as responsible for her condition, the more she is blamed, stigmatized, and deserves what's happening to her. An example of individuals who suffer from high stigma are substance addicts. They are perceived as responsible for their condition. Their own actions led them to the addiction. They are to blame and suffer any consequence that this addiction may result in. An example of individuals who suffer lower stigma are sexual assault survivors. Unlike substance addicts, sexual assault survivors are commonly considered as partially responsible for their condition, as they share the responsibility with another person, the perpetrator. Questions like what was the woman wearing and whether she paid enough attention to her drink seem relevant under rape culture and the prevalence of victim blaming. And so in the current research, we had 198 participants, half men and half women, who participated in the study online. Participants were asked to watch a pre-recorded ball game that I grew to love. But before watching the game, the participants were asked to carefully review information that the players provided about themselves, as they would be asked about the details later on. So the information about two of the players was held constant. However, the significant life event of the target player, Maya, was manipulated. So participants either saw that Maya is struggling with drug addiction, which was the high stigma condition, was sexually assaulted, which was the lower stigma condition, or was involved in a car accident, which was the control condition. After reviewing this information on its own for a little while, participants were presented with the first screen of cyberwall and those ID cards, so it will be clear which ID card refers to which player in the game. Then participants continued to watch the game when Maya was either included in the game or excluded, ostracized. So after watching the game, participants were asked to complete several questions regarding whether someone was ostracized during the game, their own need satisfaction, and to complete 3 different measures of dehumanization, designed to assess their dehumanization of Maya, the target. So those measures included the trait attribution measure, the same measure that Clark used in their research, in which participants indicated the degree to which they attribute positive and negative human traits to the target. The ascent of men measure, in which participants indicate how evolved they perceive the target. And a face value measure, where we decided that if we want to know how human they perceive the target, we should simply ask them. So these are the analyses that we did on the data, but because I don't want to upset Kip on his special day, I will not unfold the full range correction today. I will only discuss the most interesting effects. However, if you would like to review the full analysis, the paper is out and available. You're welcome. So participants who observed ostracism correctly indicated that someone was ostracized in the game and that she received less ball tosses, fewer ball tosses. They also indicated lower need satisfaction than participants who observed a game in which everyone were equally included. And in regard to dehumanization, participants attributed less human uniqueness traits and less human nature traits, replicating the same results that Clark found in their research. And those results led them to conclude that targets of ostracism are dehumanized. However, when measuring dehumanization with the ascent of men measure, there is no such effect. There is no difference between the targets of ostracism and the target if she was not ostracized, if she was included. And most interestingly, when simply asking participants to indicate how human they perceive the target, we find the opposite results. So it was actually the target that was attributed more humanness when she was ostracized and not when she was included. The only time in which stigma had a moderating effect was on trait attribution, when participants observed a drug addict being included, they attributed to her more positive human uniqueness traits, but there's no such effect for negative human uniqueness traits. And the same goes for positive human nature traits, but again, nothing for negative human nature traits. So, to summarize, or before I go summarize, recently Kip told me that at the end of a good talk, which I hope it was, the audience already knows the bottom line. So I will try to add some value to my sermon. Ostracism observers experience any threat regardless of the target stigma. Although it is not in line with my original hypothesis, it seems that in the reflexive stage, the observers of ostracism are not affected by the identity of the target. But it also doesn't get old to show that cyberbullying works. The mixed results regarding dehumanization suggest that it is unclear whether targets of ostracism are being dehumanized. But more broadly, the different measures don't seem to tap on the same construct. And so I believe it's not a methodological issue, but a theoretical issue. What is dehumanization? Does dehumanization have different facets? There is a lot more that we need to understand about dehumanization. There is definitely further research that should be done about it. And in short, it's a messy world. Lastly, one reason for the failure of addiction treatment is society's high stigma and reluctance to reintegrate addicts back into society. Our study indicates that observing a drug addict being socially included helps to facilitate positive perceptions of the person, which can in turn result in further social inclusion, and that may improve integration back into society. So be kind. It helps more than you know. I'm very happy to be here and celebrate with you and celebrate Kip, who is so important to me. However, I feel the need to acknowledge that it is also extremely difficult to be here and carry on as usual. During these scary times at home in Israel, especially with 133 people, babies, men and women, who are still held hostage in Gaza for 194 days. I hope that you will join me praying and wishing for everyone to be back home. I do not want to be back home safe and as healthy as possible. Thank you.
All right, well, good afternoon. I'm here as part of our program. I want to thank everybody for coming out. I want to thank our committee for putting this together, and I want to thank Kip for being the man of the hour. I'm going to talk to you about work that has been generated across stages of my life that leave us with the flip of ostracism and more about the strategies of overcoming ostracism. And so I'm going to focus on the idea that we don't say that you can't play. And what I'm going to do is walk you through a little bit of the background that got me here, and then end with where we'll go from here. So in regards to the background, one of the first things that I remember when I became Kip's student, and I started as Kip's student because I was a woman without a lab. And Chris Agnew was a wonderful matchmaker, and he said, I think we have a new faculty member who might be a good fit. And he had no idea what he had done, but he had changed. He changed many lives with that decision, and I'm so grateful. And I remember how impressed I was that my new advisor, as he unpacked his lab, had so many copies of a book where he was an author. And so I want to say that my journey began with Kip and my awareness of this book that was a foundation for so many things, not only in understanding of ostracism as a construct, but what academia was supposed to do. And so I basically focused a lot of the work I did post-graduation looking at what people think ostracism really is. They like to explain it in ways that minimize its impact. And everybody here who talked before me have made these connections, but we think about it a lot more than a lot of others. And so often in my career, people want to say, well, isn't it not as bad as? And so I just start most of my talks, many times casual conversations at grocery stores, with just the concept that ostracism is more painful than being negatively impacted or getting any attention, so targeted. And in theory, people will deny it initially. And they'll say, it can't be that bad to be invisible, or it can't be that hard if you're ignored. It must be worse to be the target of negative attention. And they're not right. And so I tell them that what we really know is that in regards to these experiences, best practices are to never to negate what people's perceptions are. I spent many phases of my tenure track life trying to articulate, does it matter if it's real? Does it count if they are over-exaggerating? What if it's just them? Can it be better if it's in a group? And again, they were wrong. But instead, what I encourage people to do is to understand that if you validate those recalled experiences, then really you're giving voice to an experience that, again, everyone prior to me, all my predecessors here have talked about, offers some solace to that pain. And so, at least now, they're on equal footing. So, with that, what I'd like to do is talk about the strategies for overcoming ostracism in the two domains that I focused on the most, which are in schools first. And the work that I was doing related to what I had started with Kip as a graduate student was work that was also occurring in human development and school education. And Vivian Paley developed a rule of inclusion for her rambunctious elementary students by simply stating to the students, you can't say you can't play. And it's really funny that this work happened so many decades ago when just recently I took a position at a university that needed to teach students how to be inclusive versus how to be exclusive. And it's not natural. It's not natural to know how to be inclusive. And it starts at a much earlier age than we think. And so how does this connect to Kip? Well, Kip was a pioneer in being able to communicate this connection in a film about rejection and the science of belonging. And what he did is he provided an explanation of the fundamental need for inclusion and a universal pain of exclusion. And so the director for the film, now 2 films on these topics of inclusion, wanted me to let you know, Kip, that it's been a true honor and a privilege to work with you. To thank you for saying yes to our project back in 2006 and showing up continually for the film screenings and talks since then. That your work is critically important and it's going to reach more people because we're wired for connection. And this comes from Ruth Thomas Sue, and she's the director of both Reject and Belonging. And if technology will serve us well, let's see if we can do this too. Well, due to technical difficulties, you will not get to see this clip, but basically it is Kip's first explanation of ostracism to a general audience, and it also connects to a kindergarten class where teachers are talking about how they teach their young students about ways to be inclusive rather than exclusive, and how it changes the lives of all of their students. And when I show this to my college students, I ask them, which of these experiences do you most relate to? And many of them will say, both. And I say, that's right, but which ones do you embody or mimic today? And they are much more likely to have forgotten what they do to be inclusive and think about all the ways that they are identifying and with groups that are exclusive. And so it begins this conversation renewed from kindergarten to college, and it really does help when we're in new environments where we always have a chance to kind of do a restart. So the newest edition of this movie, Belonging, is coming out in August, and Kip's contribution will still be in that new film. And so Ruth just wants to thank you for always being there to lend the legitimacy to the topic and keep it current. So the other area that I participate in is also looking at the experiences and strategies for overcoming ostracism in the workplace. And what I have also learned from these years of applying what we have understood from lab studies is that cultivating this lifelong sense of belonging at work makes a difference for overcoming these experiences of ostracism that manifest themselves in so many different ways. If you are working in academia or outside of academia where you're the newbie, or you might be a member of a minoritized group in your cohort, or you might be in transition in regards to becoming separate from your group. So you're all faculty, but now you are department chair, or you go into an administrative position, or you go into a teaching track when it's a R1 research-focused area. And all of these ways that we are labeled give us these opportunities where we really are talking about how do we cope and overcome chronic experiences in the workplace where we don't feel like we are visible. And so I really wanted to talk about just how the work that we did in the lab and looking at the stages that people go through when they are feeling ostracized really do translate to the idea of how we cope and how we inoculate. And then when we're in environments where we do feel like we're genuinely, authentically belonging, where there's a saturation of feeling included. And these things cannot be maintained in an artificial way. And so those are the things that I talk about now when people ask about retention and longevity, and is this still important, or does it matter, or if this group's okay, does that mean all groups are okay? And so I would say that in summary and conclusion, what I find ostracism research has done, and what I find that Kip has provided, is a fruitful and fulfilling research career. That I met him as a graduate student, and he gave me the foundation and the basis to be able to really find a career where all of my interests can find a place and a value, and longevity. And I really thank you for that. I also feel that the ability to evolve with this work and through the different stages is something that I could never have anticipated when I started and was just trying to survive. And so I think that Ruth's film, talking about other disciplines and talking about very young children and through the lifespan really helps us understand the worth that you provide. And so I just want to finish with an acknowledgement that one of the favorite Kipisms that I carry with me is that Kip provides, and if you're in the back of the room you may not see it, Kip provides anyone that he needs. Affiliation. He talks about the importance of funding, and through that he also offers collaboration. And so being back here at Palmer House, being here at NPA, seeing people that I spent many lab hours with, and seeing folks who have been so integral in every stage of my career, make me understand that the importance of ostracism is that you're really never alone. And this room proves that. And Kip, you know how far we've come from when I was a graduate student to where we are today, and I wish you the best. Because I'm from the Mid-Atlantic, so you're gonna love Asheville. But I also want to thank you because all of these affiliations are ones you introduced me to. Not only from funding and from a psychology identity, but also from career opportunities and research collaborations. And so I think a hearty thank you.
So what we're going to do in our last section here is we actually have two speakers. These are currently Kip's graduate students. They share an office back at Purdue, so we're going to make them now share a section here and presenting. So Rachel will go first, and then Ebony.
All right. Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Taggart, a 6-year graduate student at Purdue University. I'm working with Kip, one of Kip's last students. So in honor of Kip today, I'm going to be presenting on a project that we worked on comparing the effects of ostracism to those of mortality salience. And this project was recently accepted for publication as Social Influence, and it is currently in press. So yay! All right. So what inspired my research comparing ostracism to mortality salience, or the awareness of our own death, was noticing how common it was to see death-related terms and themes being used to describe ostracism both in the literature and in everyday conversation. So for example, one person, oh, that's how it's supposed to be. Oh, sorry, yes. Sorry, y'all. The slide is supposed to be black and it looks blank here because of the lighting. Apologies. So for example, one person was recounting a traumatic experience that he had when he was coming out to his father as gay, and horribly, he mentioned that his father responded to him by saying, "You are dead to me." And as I mentioned earlier, death-related themes are popular in the literature as well, and there are many, many examples of death themes in the literature, but for the sake of time, we don't have too much time to go over them. I'm going to talk about one of them that was very influential. Kip Williams in 2004 referred to ostracism as a metaphor for death, and they compared the experience of ostracism to that of being socially dead, stating that the feeling of invisibility and the sense of meaninglessness that comes from ostracism would result in this sense of like a prime for mortality. It would kind of be like this example of what it would be like to die, for example. And so my collaborators and I were interested in examining this idea of ostracism being a metaphor for death, but we wanted to ensure, is this a good metaphor or not? And so, both ostracism and mortality salience are threatening. Ostracism threatens our fundamental needs for belonging, self-esteem, control, and meaningful existence, as some other speakers have discussed today. Whereas mortality salience induces terror by threatening our sense of meaning, increasing the accessibility of death-related thoughts, and causing us to become more extreme in our worldviews. This is known as worldview defense. And research comparing the effects of ostracism to mortality salience is limited, but in 2015, Caroline Steele and her colleagues examined whether ostracism manipulated using cyberball would increase death thought accessibility compared to inclusion. So we put So they use cyberball here, which you're all very familiar with. And then they measured deaf thought accessibility using this word completion task where you have a blank here that can either be completed as a non-deaf word like kissed or a deaf word like killed. And so, and they found that ostracized participants had higher deaf thought accessibility compared to included participants, but this study had its limitations. For one, they didn't directly compare ostracism to mortality salience, it was just ostracism, inclusion, right? So there's no direct comparison there. And another thing too is that it only included a sample size of 35 participants for the whole study, so a power consideration. And another thing too is they only looked at deaf thought accessibility. We wanted to look at deaf thought accessibility and need satisfaction, because that's a very relevant variable, as you know, for ostracism. So we did that. All right, so our goal was to compare the effects of ostracism to mortality salience by manipulating ostracism, mortality salience, and a control condition using well-powered samples across 4 single-factor between-subject studies. And so in study 1, we manipulated ostracism, mortality salience, and control using immersive essay prompts. Participants in the ostracism condition wrote about a time they were ignored and excluded, like Eric mentioned, and how they felt about that. And participants in the sorry, what did I say? Did I say ostracism condition? Cool. My brain is all over the place and it's very cold in here. Apologies. They're trying to freeze us to death. Participants in the mortality salience instead wrote about imagining what their own death would be like and like the emotion they would attribute to that. And participants in the control condition, they talked about what they do on a typical Wednesday. And so that's for study 1. For studies 2, 3A, and 3B, we use cyberball, like Steele and colleagues did, to manipulate ostracism and inclusion, and we use cybergrave to manipulate mortality salience. Now you may be asking, what is cybergrave? Cybergrave is a new condition that we created to fit into the cyberball paradigm that would allow us to manipulate mortality salience within that paradigm. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. But we also measured reflexive need satisfaction and deaf thought accessibility using that word completion task that I showed you earlier. All right, so this is what the instruction slide looks like for cybergrave. So participants are instructed to mentally visualize the screen and to click around the parts of the screen that draw their attention. And I'll show you what that screen looks like, but this is meant to, match the instructions for cyberball. And so this is what they see. And what ends up happening when they click on the screen is, where's the mouse? A little dot appears wherever they click. I just wanted to show you that little thing. All right, I will only be showing you the graphs for study 3B because the pattern of results remain the same across 4 studies. So across all studies, mortality salience increased deaf thought accessibility compared to both ostracism and inclusion or control for study 1. And then, across all studies, ostracism lowered need satisfaction more than mortality salience compared to both mortality salience and inclusion or control. And so they have distinct effects. So despite the popularity of these death themes in the literature, our research suggests that ostracism and mortality salience do produce distinct effects. But what about chronic ostracism? We've been talking about that a lot today. Well, as you can imagine, there are difficulties with manipulating chronic ostracism in the lab, right? For one, it's not ethical. Another thing is it doesn't make sense, like how are you going to do this time-wise? You don't have the resources for that, right? So to begin to tap into this question, we conducted a correlational study measuring chronic cases of ostracism and deaf thought accessibility, and we found a small positive correlation. Chronic ostracism using Adrienne's measure was associated with higher deaf thought accessibility, but this correlation shrunk and it disappeared when we controlled for the effects of related variables like depression and emotional stability. But one thing that can be used to manipulate chronic ostracism, a proxy for that would be the life alone paradigm developed by Jean Twenge and colleagues, where participants are led to believe that based off some bogus personality test, they're going to live a very miserable life of social failure and ostracism. And so that's something that can be done in the future. And I'm going to turn this now to Eboni. But thank you very much. Thank you all for listening to me. Thank you, Jim, for inviting me. And thank you, Kip, for inspiring me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eboni. I am also one of Kip's last students. It's okay. You can cry now, Kip. I am so excited to talk about research we have looking at the uses of comics and looking at social invisibility and hypervisibility within the Black community. And so Black individuals experience different levels of visibility. The first one being invisibility, which is when a person is unseen, unheard, and unacknowledged by their social environment. And so, invisibility, we see this as falling under the fundamental need of meaningful existence. And we also see this as a synonym to oblivious ostracism, which is when a person, they haven't done anything to be ostracized, but they are just deemed as unworthy of attention by their social environment. And research that looks at invisibility in connection to the Black community found that Black individuals feel very unvalued, and they feel like their contributions to the world and to society are unnoticed when they are in experiences of visibility. On the other hand, we also have hypervisibility. This is when a person is seen, heard, and acknowledged by others more than what is normative. And so, there has been amazing research by Maayan looking at sexual objectification and how that is like a partial ostracism experience. The same with hypervisibility. In the Black community, the fact that the race of a Black individual is so focused on, then their inner being, their inner workings become so invisible. And so that's kind of like a partial invisibility, like you see me, but you don't actually see me. And research found that Black individuals who are experiencing hypervisibility, they report feeling like they're being watched, tokenized, and also they have this burden of feeling like they have to be the target representative of their in-group when they're in a space. And then we have visibility, which is kind of like the middle field of a person just feeling fully visible, fully recognized, fully seen, fully heard by others in their social environment. And so, why comics? So I went to a talk by Rich Lee, and he was talking about him and his brothers making comics. And then I ran into Kip's office, and I was like, Kip, they're doing comics, we have to use it for research. And you know, he does a little head nod. He's like, yes, we can do that. We can do that, that's good. And so, so comics are really cool because first off, they're easy to read, right? You see comics in newspapers, they're very easy to digest. But also, I really like the Lee brothers. Their focus is the fact that comics are so humorous. And because of that, people don't tend to put the stories and experiences of marginalized individuals into comics because they're not so funny. And so they take their comics and they start to take the stories and narratives of individuals in marginalized communities and they make them into comics so that people can read and digest them and be able to understand the state of what people are actually experiencing in everyday life. And so it's the same thing we did with this study. In past research, we looked at the experiences of Black individuals when it comes to invisibility and hypervisibility, and then we took those experiences and placed those into the comics that I'll show you soon. And so overall, the study is just looking at how does levels of visibility affect need satisfaction and mood. We had a 3x2 design, and so having participants view comics as if they are the main character in the comic, and the experiences in the comics focus on invisibility, visibility, and hypervisibility. There are two sets of comics for generalizability reasons. And the hypotheses were that in the visibility condition, participants report the most need satisfaction and they report the best mood. And that as visibility kind of diminished, right? So hypervisibility being this partial ostracism and invisibility being that you're fully unacknowledged, unseen, as that diminished, then need threat will become greater and also mood will worsen. And so, just to show you all the comments, I know you all have been waiting for, you like, where are the comics? And so in the invisibility comic, and these were the comics focused on the school, there are two Black children that talk to each other, and one child is saying, why is your throat so sore? And the other child said, I spent all class trying to answer questions while my classmates ignored me. And so the friend says, do you think they didn't hear you? And the main character says, no, I don't think that's it. It's just because I'm the only one in the class who is not white. In the hypervisibility comics, the only thing that's changed is their reasoning for their throat being sore. And this one, they said, I spent all class answering questions that were geared towards race. And then in the visibility condition, they read that they're just practicing a presentation that they have to give in class. And these are our results. We found support for our hypotheses, so woo for that. And so we found that participants did experience the most need threat when they read comics targeting the experience of invisibility, which was significantly different and lower than hypervisibility. And that was significantly different and lower than comics looking at the visibility experience. And this is the same pattern that we found for mood. And then looking at the needs individually, we found that only for belonging and meaningful existence did individuals, they in the invisibility common condition, they experience less belonging and less meaningful existence. For invisibility, then hypervisibility, which was a little bit higher, and then in comparison to visibility, which was the highest. And that only happened for belonging and meaningful existence, that the three of these conditions were significantly different. But when it came to self-esteem and control, Black individuals reported feeling less self-esteem and less control in both the invisibility and hypervisibility condition in comparison to the visibility condition, but those conditions were not significantly different from each other. So we kind of see that belonging and meaningful existence, you kind of see a different emerging of pattern than when it comes to the needs of self-esteem and control. In addition, I also had items that were added into the need satisfaction scale, just looking at just the overall experience of invisibility, hypervisibility, and how to adjust some of the need satisfaction items to look at that. And so items were included saying I felt unseen, or I felt judged or overlooked, to be able to get at these different subscales. And what I found that was interesting is that when it came to the invisibility subscale, those who were in the invisibility condition reported feeling the most invisible, but also people in the hypervisibility condition also reported feeling invisible. But when it came to the hypervisibility subscale, only those in the hypervisibility condition reported feeling the most invisible, and there wasn't a difference between invisibility and visibility for that condition. And so there's something about hypervisibility that's tapping into that still partial, that partial ostracism. I'm still feeling a sense of invisibility, but when you are in the invisibility condition, you don't feel that sense of hypervisibility, showing there may be distinct effects there. And so future research, just looking more into the distinct effects of invisibility and hypervisibility, we have a successful completed virtual reality application that primes both of these things, and so excited to be able to use that in the future. And then the future direction, just looking more into invisibility, hypervisibility, and also testing these comics in an applied research setting. And thank you to everyone, and thank you to
So it's at this point the students in Kip's labs, both currently and previously, would like to give you a little bit of experience of what it's like to be in Kip's lab, to be a student, and we're going to invite him to come up, and like every lab meeting, he's going to have the final word.
And aren't we 10 minutes past?
That's also from Kip too.
Okay, so if you want to leave, please feel free. First of all, I just want to say how honored and kind of blown away I was to find out that they were having this session. And at first I thought, don't they do that for people who are dead? But I really appreciate that they did this, and people came from China and Israel and Italy and Illinois. I'm sorry. Illinois. Yeah, okay. It's very gratifying. I don't want to take a long time here. First of all, a lot of the things that my students and my colleagues from Europe who came here visiting say I provided them. I was also provided that with my training. So, I think, wow, I got that from Bibb and Tony Greenwald and Tim Brock and Tom Ostrom, and I even got it from people when I was an undergraduate at Washington. So, it's not like we are a product of our training, and I'm very thankful for the training that I have. And the other thing is that the ideas are all over the place, and I love that. It's programmatic because there's a common theme, but I loved having the students come in and talk to me and figure out where are your interests and where are my interests and how can we make them both make sense. And everybody came in with their own ideas. And sexual objectification is a form of ostracism. I never would have thought of that in a million years. And hypervisibility and invisibility and all the ideas that have been talked about here. I think shows how creative the students and my collaborators were. And the reason we are successful is because of what they've done, far more than what pearls of wisdom I may or may not have said. Although I still don't remember playing a video game in the middle of That sounds really bad. So anyway, I don't want to keep everybody here long. We're already way past. But in addition to the people that were here, there's many students I've had. And I've been really fortunate to have some great people come to visit our lab, some of whom were here today, and others were like, their students have come and worked with me, and that's always breathed, it caused a breath of fresh air in our labs, and I really like that connection. My colleagues at Purdue have been wonderful, and I've been fortunate to be able to collaborate with a lot of them as well. And we've got people that were in graduate school with me. Steve Knight, I knew this would happen.
Oh no!
And Steve Harkins, excuse me, and Jeff Jackson, Ren Sloan. They've all influenced me, and we've been fortunate enough to collaborate on a lot of ideas. And so it's been a wonderful time for me. I love this career, and it's kind of weird to be over in 2 weeks, but I still plan on contacting my students and saying, what about this idea? And maybe writing some stuff with people or whatever. Probably won't be doing your analyses for you. Big inside joke. So anyway, I appreciate all of you staying here for so long, and I just love listening to all my former students talk, and not all of you were my students, but were my collaborators too. And so I want to thank you again for having me here, and social hours coming up, so if you have questions, ask them or me there. Okay, thank you.